Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Greg McKee. I'm Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Tryp Therapeutics, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody today to Tryp Therapeutics' third quarter Investor Day presentation. Joining me today is Jim Gilligan, Tryp's Chief Science Officer, as well as Luke Hayes, our Chief Financial Officer. So with that, we'll dive right in. I got to say, we're quite excited about developments this last quarter at Tryp Therapeutics, and I'll ask Luke to advance to the next slide. So I realize that some of these slides will begin with maybe a little bit of a repetition for those that have been tracking the company, but I want to make sure we have an opportunity just to walk through a couple of the basic items of the company. First and foremost, I just want to mention that we're very excited about being highly focused on the use of psilocybin and its related chemistries as our focus. A lot of other companies are looking at different companies, or different chemistries, or they're trying to create new chemistries. We're highly focused on what we think is the chemistry that has the highest potential in the areas that we are working for a number of different reasons. So one, we're highly focused on that. Second of all, we're very focused on two very unique indications around chronic pain and eating disorders. We believe that there's tremendous opportunity for the psychedelic industry, and we're very excited about our other companies that are in the area that are working in mood disorders, for example, in depression, in anxiety, in PTSD, and the rest. And we're certainly rooting on the sidelines for those companies to be incredibly successful. But in addition to that, we believe that there's tremendous opportunity, in particular around chronic pain, which we'll get into here shortly. But this is, we believe, a highly differentiating factor of Tryp versus other companies in the arena. Next slide, please, Luke. I also wanted to kick off by highlighting one of the announcements that we just made this week. We've made two changes to our scientific advisory board. First of all, we added Dan Claw, MD, to the scientific advisory board. He's a world-renowned expert in the field of fibromyalgia and what is known as nociplastic pain. We're going to be hearing and talking a lot about nociplastic pain in the coming months and coming years, is my anticipation, in large part because of Dr. Claw and his work, and also because of a lot of work that we'll be doing here at Tryp Therapeutics in that specific field of chronic pain. In addition, I'm very excited to also reiterate that as of last week, that Robin Carhart-Harris, one of the renowned experts in psychedelics, of course, as many of you know, has agreed and has accepted the position as chair of our scientific advisory board. By adding Robin in that role, we create incredible cohesion to this group, and very excited for what we are building here in terms of scientific advisors around the company. I also want to just take a moment and introduce you to the rest of the core team at Tryp Therapeutics. Obviously, besides myself, Jim Gilligan in the role of President and Chief Science Officer, and Luke Hayes as Chief Financial Officer. We have a number of other individuals in the company that are critical to the development of Tryp 8802 and Tryp 8803. And that includes Tom D'Orazio, our Chief Operating Officer, Pete Guzzo, our Vice President of Drug Development, and Larry Norder, our Vice President of Manufacturing. In addition, similar to other companies that are working in a virtual environment, as many do these days, we have a number of consulting individuals, including in the toxicology position, including in our Chief Medical Officer position, and others. We also have a number of external resources that we've recruited in to help support drug development. Some of them we've announced, and some we'll review today. And on top of all of that, as we've talked about in the past, our strategy is to leverage academic collaborators in our work in these very different therapeutic areas. And each one of those collaborators has anywhere between, call it 5 to maybe 15 or so individuals in those institutions that are working with us, alongside us, to be successful in those areas. And that adds a tremendous amount of value and expertise to our team. So I'm incredibly proud of the team that we're building, and that's around these indications that we're focused on. Next slide, please, Luke. To dive right into our pipeline, as we've also discussed in the past, we've got two primary assets. First of all, what we're calling Tryp 8802, which is our non-proprietary 25 milligram capsule of synthetic psilocybin. We're sourcing this from USONA Institute, and we're using this as a very rapid way to get into the clinic and test the hypothesis of the utility of psilocybin in these other areas in the psychedelic arena, which we're quite excited about. Tryp 8803 is our proprietary psilocybin-based product that will be manufactured exclusively by Curia, formerly known as AMRI, and also Alchemy. It's a novel formulation with a novel route of administration that we believe is highly unique and is expected, we believe, to improve the patient experience. We'll be using that to work in our phase 2b clinical studies and beyond. And as we announced previously, we have a partnership with the University of Michigan to complete the bridging studies to allow us to go straight into humans. Our overall strategy is to leverage a number of different academic partners. As I mentioned, we've already discussed our University of Florida partnership in the past, and we're very excited about Jennifer Miller and her team, and anticipate being in a position to file our IND in the binge eating and the hypothalamic obesity arena very shortly. We've also announced our partnership now with the University of Michigan, which we're very excited about. Obviously, you see the connection by adding Dr. Dan Claw to the SAB. Dr. Claw is the leading expert in the field of fibromyalgia. We've been working with the University of Michigan now for months on this clinical study, and we're poised to file that IND as well. So we anticipate having 2 INDs filed very shortly. And Dr. Claw and his team, including Kevin Banke, the principal investigators, and others, have done a phenomenal job in helping us move this forward very quickly. And we anticipate being in the clinic with that second indication in chronic pain very shortly. We also have in discussions 2 other academic collaborations, one around phantom limb pain and a 4th around complex regional pain syndrome. And we look forward to discussing more of those details with you down the road. But we anticipate that we will have at least 2 and potentially up to 4 phase 2A clinical studies up and running sometime later this year. And then also, as we mentioned very recently, we've created a partnership with the University of Michigan to work through the details of identifying the specific proprietary formulation that we will be working on around Tryp 8803. And with the expertise of Dr. George Mashur, who's the chief of the Department of Anesthesiology, we believe that we're working with the leading expert in this field that can really help us identify the best formulation and work through the details of our specific route of administration and the dosing, and making sure that we have that all done appropriately. Next slide, please. So since we spoke last time at our previous Investor Day, a number of different things have emerged and we've been able to accomplish, which we're incredibly proud of. First of all, we announced, as I mentioned, our plans to conduct a phase 2A clinical study in fibromyalgia within the chronic pain and with the Chronic Pain and Fatigue Research Center in the Department of Anesthesiology at the University of Michigan. Second of all, we announced our collaboration with George Mashur, MD, PhD, who's the chair of the Department of Anesthesiology, as I mentioned, at the University of Michigan, to work on the development of our proprietary Tryp 8803 drug product. Thirdly, we announced advancement of our manufacturing capabilities for synthetic psilocybin through our partnership with Alchemy, which is, and we're working with them around both the preclinical and the clinical aspects of that. And then lastly, we've announced our partnership with Fluence to develop psychotherapy training and protocols to accompany the administration of our drugs, which is a critical component as we've discussed. We believe that the solution for our patients will be both the combination of introduction and dosing of the drug as well as psychotherapy. Next slide, please, Luke. Yes, and then we've also announced, of course, our collaboration with ClinLogix, our contract research organization to support clinical study activity. The next couple slides walk through our financial results for the third quarter. Let me turn it over to Luke Hayes, our Chief Financial Officer, to make just a couple of brief comments about where we ended up at the end of this quarter. Luke, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, sure thing. So with our financials, just like typical early stage drug development company, majority of our activity is spent on our research and development activities, our clinical development activities, and then also as a publicly traded company, a certain amount of activity that we spend with investor relations and other compliance requirements. As of May 31st, we had $5.6 million cash in the bank. All of these figures, I need to note, are in Canadian dollars, which is the currency that we report in, being a listed company on the CSE. Prepaid amount of $450,000. The only thing I would note there is that includes a prepaid amount for our D&O policy for the company, which is quite standard, but nothing particularly unusual, I would say, in terms of our balance sheet activity or what the company had performed against in terms of that particular quarter. Our current cash balance as of today is $4.6 million Canadian, which we expect to carry us through over the next several months as we start to ramp up our clinical trial activity. Like any early stage drug development company, we have a need for additional amounts of capital to fund our clinical trials. And so we certainly expect to raise additional capital between now and the end of the year, and are anxious to make additional progress and announce additional milestones so that we see additional appreciation in the market cap and reduce the cost of financing for us overall. With respect to our income statement or our spend activity, there's about $2.5 million that was spent during that particular 3-month period that we just reported on. I'll just make one note here, which is that $900,000 of that was a non-cash expense for share-based payments, which is typical given that we use equity as a form of compensation throughout the company. So it was really not a particularly eventful quarter in terms of financial activity, given that we didn't have an equity issuance during those 3 months. But in terms of our progress, our clinical programs, manufacturing, and other areas that Greg has discussed, really a huge period for us and pretty significant for us in terms of overall progress.
Great. Just moving on then, a couple of comments I wanted to make in terms of where we sit relative to our peers. So specifically looking at companies with $100 million market cap and above, there's a terrific chart that we put together that talks a little bit about both the stage of development as well as the specific indications. As many of you are aware, of course, there's a lot of different companies working in the psychedelic arena, and we're certainly very excited. As I mentioned earlier, we want to see all of them to be highly successful. Many companies, as you can see from this chart, are working in depression, addiction, some in anxiety, and most of them, frankly, are in the sort of phase 2A or 2B at best, kind of position in terms of the stage of development, right? So there's not really, frankly, a lot of companies that are in clinical development, yet in this arena. We certainly hope that there will be more soon, but there's very few, yet. And also, frankly, there's not a lot of companies that are working in chronic pain and eating disorders broadly, specifically the eating disorders that we are looking at. We're quite excited about the position of Tryp being very unique. We believe that the pain arena is massive. We think that it impacts millions and millions of people around the world with a number of different types of, again, what's known as nociplastic pain or chronic pain. We think this is an emerging area for psychedelics overall, and we believe that psilocybin in particular has the potential to really be a breakthrough therapy for patients in this area that frankly don't have a whole lot of other treatments to turn to. So we're very excited about being unique from a perspective of where we are focused our efforts around these unique therapeutic indications. And second of all, frankly, we're quite excited to be really poised soon to be filing not one, but 2 INDs in each of these areas, at least one in chronic pain, as I mentioned, and also a second in eating disorders, with 2 others in chronic pain right on the heels of that, which would put us right in good stead with many other companies in the area, which I know most of you are familiar with, that have a much more significant market cap than we do. So this gives you a little bit of a sense in terms of how we see the industry and where we see Tryp playing an important role. And we certainly want to see these other companies successful. We certainly see that there's a lot of opportunity for psychedelics overall. We are just in a place where we believe that there's even greater potential, and we want to help unlock and unleash the potential and the full potential of psychedelics through our work in chronic pain and eating disorders. If you look at the relative market cap, I think that sort of speaks for itself. At the moment, Tryp's valued at about $35 million Canadian, relative to the likes of Compass, MindMed, Cybin, Selos, Bionomics, and others. We're well undervalued and believe that this is a phenomenal opportunity, frankly, both for patients at this point in terms of bringing new therapies to these therapeutic areas, but also, frankly, for investors. And we're quite excited about what the upside looks like for all of us involved in the company. Our current capital structure is at the bottom of the left-hand side of this slide. We've got 66 million shares issued and outstanding. We've got about 9.3 million warrants, which we anticipate will very likely be exercised in the near future. And we've got about just under 15 million options and compensation units. So we've got just a little over 90 million in fully diluted shares outstanding at the moment of the company. Then in terms of looking ahead, there's many different milestones that we've got our eye on, and we look forward to discussing with you in the future. As I mentioned now a couple of times, that the first and foremost top of mind for us is submission of 2 IND applications within the next 60 days for a phase 2A clinical trials, one in eating disorders with the University of Florida, and a second IND in fibromyalgia with the University of Michigan. Secondly, we are looking forward to our enrollment of our first patients in multiple phase 2A clinical trials, which would very likely obviously be the trials at the University of Florida in eating disorders and the University of Michigan in fibromyalgia. Thirdly, we're anticipating the announcement of 1, potentially 2 new clinical research collaborations with leading academic research institutes for 2 other chronic pain indications. Both those institutions are based in California. Both of them are part of the University of California academic system. Both are of the highest caliber, and each of those institutions has deep expertise in these relative areas of phantom limb pain and complex regional pain syndrome. And we look forward to being in a position to discuss more details of those specific institutions and those studies in the coming months. Lastly, in addition, we anticipate continued expansion of intellectual property applications. We've retained Morrison Foerster, as I believe we mentioned our last quarterly call. We've had a number of different discussions with them over the last several months this quarter around our intellectual property strategy from a couple different perspectives, frankly. 1, in terms of filing additional provisional patents. 2, in terms of the specific data that we need to generate to convert our current provisional patent, which we filed back in March of 2021, to PCT applications, which we hope would ultimately become filed and issued patents. And then thirdly, frankly, we've had lots of open discussions with Morrison Foerster around the competitive landscape on the intellectual property front. And we'll leave the details of this for a future call, but I'd like to just mention, here that so far what we've heard specifically to other companies such as Compass and others that have issued patents, that we're quite encouraged by what we're hearing in terms of our ability to navigate around that intellectual property relatively easily. At the moment, as we understand, there's very specific IP that Compass has around their specific formulation, but frankly, it's not at all a challenge, as we know at the moment, in terms of our ability to work on our novel formulation and our novel route of administration. So we believe that we've got an open field to move forward assertively. And again, of course, we have high hopes for Compass and their phase 2B study that they'll be announcing here shortly. In addition, we anticipate advancing the development of our proprietary candidate, Tryp 8803. We've put together a comprehensive set of bridging studies around this program to take us into phase 2B studies once we see a confirmatory read from our 2A trials, which will be open label, and we anticipate being able to share data around those studies on a fairly regular basis. And so those wheels are already in motion to not only finalize the formulation, but also complete the bridging studies to allow us to get into human trials in phase 2B, which will be a critical step for us to create this novel drug with a novel formulation. And then lastly, we continue to make very good progress around our GMP manufacturing of synthetic psilocybin. We anticipate being able to announce completion of cGMP manufacturing of material. We've already completed 2 engineering batches of material, which provides us sufficient drug to run our bridging studies, as well as to do other studies. As Jim Gilligan has mentioned in the past, we're already manufacturing at scale, at commercial scale, which means we've got plenty of supply. Both Curia, formerly known as AMRI, our API manufacturer, and Alchemy, our fill finish contract manufacturer organization, are based here in North America. The drug will be sourced locally. It will not require an import license, and we expect that we'll have plenty of material, not only for our own studies, but also, frankly, to help support other academic institutions and potentially the industry with both oral and our novel formulation of Tryp 8802 and Tryp then 8803.